So we're continuing on in our first unit, Metaphysics and Epistemology. We looked at some of the key figures in Western philosophy, like René Descartes, John Locke, George Berkeley, and these thinkers were all working within what's called the modern philosophical tradition. A lot of them were Enlightenment thinkers. They were writing in this historical period in European history in which there was an explosion of knowledge in all these different fields, right? And then we saw the Romantic movement as being a reaction to reason taking a hold on public consciousness and inquiry. Well, we're going to kind of take a step back today, and we're not going to look so much at a particular thinker's views. Today we're just going to kind of survey some ideas within the philosophy of mind. We've been doing kind of philosophy of mind up until this point. That is philosophy about what is the mind, how does the mind work, what is the body's relationship to the mind. All the thinkers we've been looking at so far have been talking about this stuff, right? With regards to Descartes, he put forth a dualistic view. Does anybody remember what dualism is?
That there's basically two states in the world, the physical stuff and the non-physical.
Yeah, he would use the word substance. Basically, everything that exists in the universe is either a material thing or it's a mental thing. And that these are irreducible. They're separate and distinct. Well, Locke was also a dualist, but in Locke's philosophy that we read, instead of trying to answer what we might call metaphysical problems, which are topics having to do with the nature of the universe and what exists, Locke was doing epistemology, right? And what did Locke say? Well, he had a bone to pick with Descartes with regards to how we primarily obtain knowledge of the world around us. Descartes put forth the epistemological view of rationalism. Does anybody remember what this view said?
Gain knowledge through reason.
Exactly. Primarily, we obtain knowledge of the world around us through something our mind is doing, some sort of logical, analytical operations. Well, Locke disagreed with this, and he put forth his own epistemological view. Empiricism, which is knowledge through experience. Perfect. He thought, no, we don't obtain knowledge of the world primarily through thinking about stuff, through reasoning through things. It's dealing with stuff. You know, it's touching stuff, seeing stuff, tasting stuff. That's how we learn what the world is like. And then we looked at Berkeley, right, who agreed with Locke's empiricism, but he disagreed with Descartes' dualism, right? Instead, what view did he put forth?
Like sense and perception.
Yeah. What view about the nature of the universe, in contrast to dualism?
Oh, monism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he put forth a monistic view. Monism is this kind of big umbrella term that is supposed to describe views that think the universe is just made up of one underlying thing. And you can separate monistic views into broadly two different camps. The contemporary scientific view, which thinks that all of this stuff is just matter. That's what it is at bottom, even our minds. It's just a material thing made out of atoms and molecules. But Berkeley put forth a different monistic view known as idealism or immaterialism, which was the view that, no, actually, all the stuff that you see around you, it's not a material thing. Not only can we not prove the existence of material objects outside of our own minds, but everything that you see around you is actually like a mental thing. It's either a mind or an idea, right? And we thought that this was kind of a wacky view, but we saw the problems that he was bringing to bear on this commonsensical picture of the world, that there are objects outside of our own minds that we can know, right? And that we can ascertain. Well, all of these thinkers are working within the philosophy of mind, trying to answer questions about what is the mind, how does the mind work, what makes up the mind, how do our ideas and perceptions relate to each other. Today, we're going to kind of describe some of the views that we saw in those thinkers more generally, and we're going to offer some other views in the philosophy of mind about what the mind is and how it works. And to do that, I asked you to read one chapter of Paul Churchland's book that he co-wrote with his wife, Patricia Churchland, called Matter and Consciousness, in which he tries to provide an overview of the philosophy of mind, some of the problems that philosophers of mind are trying to answer, and different views that they've come up with to help solve some of the issues that we have when we think about this stuff. And so, the philosophy of mind is trying to answer a central question. What the hell is the mind? What the fuck is this thing? Okay? Here's what Churchland has to say about it right at the beginning of this chapter. What is the real nature of mental states and processes? In what medium do they take place? And how are they related to the physical world? Will my consciousness survive the disintegration of my physical body? Or will it disappear forever as my brain ceases to function? Is it possible that a purely physical system, such as a computer, could be constructed so as to enjoy real consciousness? Where do minds come from? What are they? These are some of the central concerns that philosophers of mind are trying to answer. And it touches on a bunch of different topics in philosophy. Free will, moral responsibility, artificial intelligence, existentialism, phenomenology. What the mind is and how it works has ramifications for all of these other things that we think about and interact with in daily life. And thus, it's important to get a handle on, well, what exactly the mind is. Is it a physical thing or is it a mental thing? Is it something that is not a physical thing like a table is? Because depending on what your answer is to that question, that's going to have implications for the rest of what your beliefs should be if you're trying to be consistent. So let's kind of go through these one by one a little bit. We've touched on a few of these topics before, but it would be good to go over them again. Let's say you take on the contemporary scientific view of the universe, that everything that exists is just material. It's matter. It's governed by the laws of nature. Okay? Electrons and protons working in certain ways, electromagnetic fields working according to certain laws. Well, if you think the mind is a physical thing, it's just made of atoms, molecules, chemical reactions, all this stuff, can you see how that might threaten the existence of free will? Because what is a biological or a chemical process? It's just physical stuff following certain laws, right? And whether or not a chemical reaction occurs, the chemicals don't have any control over, right? Something happens when one element meets another element. If your mind is just a physical thing, you might think, well, the reason why I have the ideas and the perceptions that I do, the reason why I do what I do is just because there are certain chemical reactions happening in my brain. So, where's the agency exactly? How can agency or free will arise out of a physical system when it's clear that other physical things don't have free will, like a table or a laptop, right? A laptop can't decide whether it's used or not. But somehow we have this idea about humans that we have a real choice, that we can decide what we want to do. Well, if we're just a physical system like any other, do we really have free will? Is there such a thing as agency, as real choice? And if free will goes out the window, then you might ask, well, if nobody really has ultimate control over what they think or do, doesn't that imply nobody's ultimately morally responsible for anything? If you're just sitting here because of something your brain is making you do, and you don't have any control over that, how can you be held morally responsible for sitting here or not? We think moral responsibility has something to do with actually having control over what we do, but if control goes out the window, then how can we hold anybody morally responsible for anything, including murderers and rapists? If they don't have genuine control over what they do. And of course, that has ramifications for our criminal justice system, right? If nobody's morally responsible for anything, is it just to punish people and reward other people? This is a serious question, right? So all of these issues are wrapped up in the philosophy of mind, as well as artificial intelligence, which is something that philosophers and scientists are talking a lot about now, right? There are all these worries that an artificial intelligence is going to develop consciousness, right? And then take over the world or fuck us all over or something like that. Well, that's a real question, right? Because if we don't get clear on what the mind is, how can we get clear on whether or not a computer can ever become sentient or conscious? If it can feel like we can, if it can have emotions, desires, a will. All of this stuff is something that things that have minds do. Can a computer acquire a mind? Could we create a consciousness using just physical components like wires and binary code and things? It's a good question. And finally, what we've been talking about this whole time, what you think the mind is going to have implications for knowledge. And what you think about rationality. If you think nobody has control over what they do ultimately, then you can't criticize people for being rational or irrational. Right? Because they don't have any control over whether or not they're rational or irrational. And then we might ask more deeper fundamental questions about, well, if our mind is just a physical thing, then what is this? Is knowledge just some sort of amalgamation of material, like, what is knowledge then? What does that even mean? So philosophy of mind has implications for all these other fields that we're going to be talking about in this class. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try to give you a bunch of different views on what the mind is and what the mind's relationship is to the body. And we'll talk about some of their strengths, some of their weaknesses, and I'll allow you to make up your own mind later about what it is that you believe, which view you think makes the most sense. What all these views are kind of charged with is providing explanations for the different capacities that we have as conscious beings. What are some of the things that we're able to do because we have a mind that other things cannot do? What can we do that a table can't? It's a big question, right? But shout some stuff out. What can we do that a table can't?
Make a decision.
Make a decision. We might even break that down more, right? Like, what is involved in making a decision? Yeah, that's kind of a complex question. Anybody else? Thoughts? We can have thoughts. What are thoughts? These are only questions fucking philosophers would ask, okay? Yeah, we can have thoughts. What else can we do?
Love.
We can love, right? Whatever that means. I'm teaching a class on philosophy of love, and let me tell you, it's really hard to try to answer what is love. Yeah.
Learn.
We can learn, so we can... So that's another weird thing. We have these things called beliefs, and we can update our beliefs through our experiences, through thinking about things. Presumably tables don't have beliefs, right? All of these things that we've been talking about, we can do them because our consciousness has certain capacities. One of the capacities that we have is the capacity for attention. We can attend to things. Okay? That is, we can direct our conscious awareness to things, right? So, first of all, what separates us from other things in the universe, we think, is that we have conscious awareness of our environment and other things don't. But what's unique about us is we can direct that awareness however we want, kind of, at will, right? You can choose to pay attention to me now, or you can choose to go into your own la-la land, right? You can choose to think about the clouds in the sky, or you can choose to think about Berkeley's idealism, right? You can somehow direct what your conscious awareness is considering at will. Is that not a crazy thing? How the hell do we have that ability? That seems really strange, right? Somehow we presume we have some sort of control over what we're thinking about, what we are imagining, what we're considering. Well, related to this is our capacity for imagination. Imagination, right? We can imagine things. We can picture things, right? We can come up with scenarios that don't actually exist. We can come up with ideas that haven't been thought before, or inventions, right? We can picture whatever we want at will. That's kind of strange, right? Why and how do we have this capacity to imagine things that we've never seen before or experienced, right? Why would we be given that capacity? How does that capacity arise? Why is that capacity, like, in a sense, infinite, right? You can imagine anything. It's not limited to, I don't know, what you've seen or heard, really, right? Really weird. What sets us apart from other animals, we think, is that we have the capacity for reflection. And this is a big one, right? This is one that philosophers all tend to kind of argue that distinguishes us from animals. We have the capacity to consider things, turn things over in our minds. We have the capacity to think about our own existence, right? Do any other animals, can they do that? Like, say I set, a chocolate chip cookie in front of you. And I'm like, oh, this cookie's really good, right? You want the cookie? You can, think, oh, fuck, do I want the cookie? Like, I don't know. Am I on my diet right now? Is this going to be my cheat meal? Am I allergic to anything in the cookie? I don't know. Like, should I eat the cookie? What is a dog going to do if you put a cookie in front of it?
The cookie.
It's probably just going to eat the cookie unless you've trained it not to, right? We can train animals, but we don't seem to have much evidence that animals can think about their own existence, can think about whether or not they should engage in some action, at least not to the extent that we can, right? We actually seem to have the ability to stop ourselves, to decide what it is that we want to do, to reflect on that stuff. That's really weird. Where the hell does that come from? I don't know. And we can even think about our own thinking, right? This is kind of like what philosophers are doing, right? All the philosophers we've been looking at up until this point, they've been thinking about our own thinking, right? And trying to make our own thinking clear to us. Now, as we talked about in Plato's Cave, a lot of people don't do this, right? But we can do it. We have the capacity to reflect. Doesn't mean it's always activated, but it's an ability, right? And this list is by no means exhaustive, but finally, something that's related to all of these is, and Descartes was big on this, right? What R word am I thinking of? What can we do that animals perhaps can't?
Rationalize?
Yeah, we can reason. Exactly. You went for the harder, longer one. Yeah, we can rationalize. We can reason. We can trace the logical connections between things. We can follow an argument or an idea to its logical conclusion. Right? We can discover the connections between things and then make connections between other things. Really weird, but very powerful, right? This thing called reason is what has allowed us to, construct the society and the world that we have today that gives you pink drink, and laptops and all of this stuff, right? That's pretty great though, right? You love pink drink, right? Who doesn't? Or The Bachelor, right? Whatever. So, philosophers of mind are concerned with providing explanations for a lot of things, including these capacities, how these capacities work, questions like, what is the mind? Questions like, where did the mind come from? These are all within the purview of philosophy of mind. And thinkers have put forth a bunch of different views about the mind and the relationship between the mind and the body. In this chapter, Churchland surveys a bunch of those views, provides arguments for some, and tries to show where their weaknesses lie. He talks about the view that Descartes puts forth in his writings, right? What we might call substance dualism. But he talks about other dualisms as well, other theories for how it could be the case that our mind and body are distinct and what their relationship between them is. So let me put on the board now, let's talk through some of these metaphysical theories of the mind. That is, theories about what the mind is. Okay? Well, we can start by kind of summarizing Descartes' view, right? Descartes' view was what's called substance dualism. He thought that the mind and ideas and material things are two separate substances. That's the word that he used. That is, they're fundamentally made up of different things that are distinct from one another, that are irreducible to each other. The contemporary scientific view is basically going to shut that down and flip it on its head. What we might call reductive mental materialism. You remember seeing this word reductive looking at the contemporary scientific view, right? Reductive. I think we called it reductive naturalistic materialism or something like that, right? What does this view state? Well, does anybody remember from our Berkeley day? What makes up stuff in the universe, according to our best scientific theories? What is all this made of? Right, matter, energy, mass, these things are all kind of interchangeable, right, in physics. Likewise, if the contemporary scientific view says this is all made up of matter, what do you think they're going to say the mind is? It's just matter, right? It's just some complex arrangement of material stuff. Okay? So we can summarize this view as it's the view that mental states and processes are just physical states and processes. Okay? The mind is ultimately reducible to the brain. Hope I'm spelling all that right. I'm going a little fast. So this view is basically going to say something like, look, when we talk about the mind, what we're talking about ultimately is stuff the brain is doing. Okay? There is no real separation or distinction between your mind and your brain. The experiences you're having, the thoughts, the desires, the emotions, that's just brain stuff, okay? Just chemical reactions in the brain, the biology of the brain doing its thing, okay? And so, when we're talking about things like love or emotions or dreams and hopes and values, concepts, all of these things ultimately can just be explained in terms of what the material stuff is doing, in terms of the laws of nature, in terms of biochemical reactions and neurotransmitters and electrical impulses and neurons firing. That's all this stuff is at the end of the day. Love is just neuron 24B firing to 37A. That's it. So this is one view you can have in the mind. The mind is just this physical thing. It's no different ultimately than any other physical thing. It's just like a way more complex table or a way more complex projector or clock. Okay? Of course, there are some problems with this view, right? Is this view intuitive to you? Does it seem right? Does it seem like the amazing and profound love you have for your cat is just neurons firing in a certain way? Is that all it is? Or the love you have for pink drink? You know, is it just some sort of chemical reaction in the brain? Is that it? What do you think? Or is there something else going on there? What do y'all think? It's okay if you think this. I just want to hear what you think and why. Have you ever thought about this stuff before? Yeah.
I don't believe this just because I think that would be really sad. Like, that everything is just kind of like, it's all just neurons firing and stuff. Because, like, that makes sense to me in some capacity for some things, like general things, but like you said, like deeper thinking and stuff like that, that doesn't make sense that it would just be.
Why would it be sad?
I don't know, just because like it reduces a person down to their like brain and their brainstem.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of not fun.
Okay, it's not fun. Would you say it's scary?
Yeah.
Why?
Just because like, even if it's just my brain and brainstem thinking it, it feels like I'm more than that. So I think that it would be just really freaky if I wasn't.
Okay. So you have this image of yourself and how your thinking works, and what other people have going on, and this view doesn't line up with that picture, right? And so you're like, well, it seems to me that there's some cool stuff going on, and this is kind of I don't know. It reduces everything to something that doesn't jive with what I'm thinking, with what I'm feeling. Yeah? Does anybody like this view?
I don't like it, but I think it makes sense.
Okay, will you say more?
I think a lot of things are habit. I agree that like it would be so sad if it just like is down to the brain. But I think a lot of things like the perception of or how relationships should work, I think that's something that's just kind of been passed down as like long as humans have been around. And I think if we were raised on a different idea, we wouldn't think the same way.
Okay.
So I think that like out of habit, we tend to have those same thoughts, and it's not necessarily just our own emotions.
Okay.
As much as I don't know how to fully explain that, but like.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you're saying, I think that, look, some of the ideas and views that we probably have, like we didn't come up with them. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about the mind, like, it doesn't seem wrong to say that there's something more going on there than just physical, chemical reactions. Is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah.
I would just say, to me, it doesn't make sense because if so, I feel like this is something that could be like, measured or should be consistent. Like there's obviously it varies per person. So, what is that deciding or determining factor that makes certain people think or act a certain way, but others not act in that way? You know what I mean? Like our responses to certain things, like how we process our experiences and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean,
like, because what love means to you may not be what love means to me. But if this is all just everything's matter, it's a physical thing, it's a reaction, then how come we're not getting the same reaction?
Well, let me try to play devil's advocate. It's because our brains aren't the same. Like I got a bunch of different folds, you got a bunch of different folds, like, I have different neural structures than you do, That's what they're going to say. The issue, of course, is that we still don't have a great deal of knowledge about the brain and consequently the mind, right? People think and do weird shit. We don't have a complete story of how or why that is yet. So this view is kind of banking on the idea that, sure, like right now we can't explain everything, but like we will be able to eventually if we just continue doing science and neurobiology and MRI scans and all this stuff.
Do you think they can exist at the same time?
What?
Like both those ideas of it being like just a chemical response versus an emotional response?
Like if they're different things?
Yeah, but like they happen at the same time.
That's a view that I think he talks about in the reading. Let me get back to that, actually.
Okay. I just think about like people say like trauma is like a chemical imbalance.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's
But is it
yeah.
emotion or is it just a chemical imbalance?
Well, according to this view, they're going to say, like, it might be a great many number of things,
Mm-hmm.
but whatever it is, there's something physical going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it might be an imbalance in the neurotransmitters you have. It might be that, you know, the connections between your neurons are situated a certain way, you know, something like that. But they're going to say, talking about emotion, like that's just a cover word for chemical, biological stuff. Okay, so this is one view that you can have, right? It's based on a monistic view of the universe, that everything is just made of, you know, one underlying thing. This is the view that tends to go along with the contemporary scientific view of the universe that we looked at. But then there are a whole bunch of dualistic views, okay? Descartes' view is of this type. Mental dualism, this is a large umbrella term, is the view that mental and physical states and processes are fundamentally distinct. I should say mental and physical Can y'all read that word?
Yeah.
It's my cursive coming out. In other words, what's going on in your mind is somehow distinct and separate. It's its own thing compared to what's going on in your brain, what's going on in your body, what's going on in a table. Okay? The mind is irreducible. It's not reducible to the brain. We can't just explain what's going on in the mind with our emotions, with our traumas, just by talking about physical stuff. And again, Descartes' view is a type of this. His view is substance dualism. But there are certain problems that arise once you say, look, you have a mind and you have a body, and those are two different substances, two different kinds of material. So instead, philosophers of mind, to try to answer some of the problems associated with Descartes' view, have come up with what's called property dualism. So there's substance dualism. It says there are two different substances make up things in the universe. But then there's property dualism, which it's a weird view, and I still haven't been able to wrap my mind around it. But it's something like, it's not that there are two different substances that make up all this stuff. It's that things have two different kinds of properties, or two different kinds of natures to them. So, your mind has physical properties and mental properties. And that these things are distinct and they're different. The word property is like a weird one, right? It means like feature or characteristic. It's hard for me to wrap my head around this idea that things have two fundamentally distinct and different characteristics to them. But that's what the property dualists are going to say.
So when you say like characteristics, are you saying like they're their potential of like their function type thing?
That's part of it. It means something even more basic than that, like a glass being half full of water has the property of being half full and half empty at the same time. but the glass with the water is one thing.
Okay.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, it's a weird view, and again, I still haven't completely understood it. It's like, take a glass of water, okay, and it's like half full of water. Property dualism is like saying this has the property of being half full, and this has the property of being half empty. Both of those are true, but there's just one thing here. But it has two different properties or characteristics. It's weird. It's not so important, I think, that we like completely understand this view.
Right.
What's important is the views that fall out of it that we're going to talk about. For example, like epiphenomenalism. Okay? Big, hard word. The idea isn't too difficult. Okay? Epiphenomenalism. This is the view that once you have a complex arrangement of matter, like in a human being, mental phenomena emerge from that, like they suddenly start existing, but the mental phenomena doesn't have a causal impact on physical phenomena. So think about it like this. The epiphenomenalist is going to say, you have a mind because of how your brain is organized. Like your mind, the existence of your mind has somehow emerged from that. And it's a different thing, but your mind is basically just like a movie in your head. It has no relationship to what's physically going on in your brain. The movie in your head comes out of the chemicals that are happening in your brain, but the movie in your head, it doesn't change anything about the brain. The brain makes the movie happen, but the movie doesn't have any causal impact on anything physical. Does that make sense? Kinda? So in other words, they're going to say that we have a mind, but our thoughts, our ideas, our desires, they don't have any impact on physical stuff. Our mind doesn't have an impact on our brain. Our mind doesn't have an impact on the chalk. Our mind is just kind of like this separate thing existing in its own way, separated from our brain in a weird way. I know, right? It's like, where did they come up with these views? Bless you. It might be helpful to contrast this with Descartes' view so that you really understand what this view is saying. What did Descartes think? He thought that we had a mind and we had a body. And our body can affect our mind, and our mind can affect our body. Right? Our body can affect how we feel, what we're thinking, all this stuff, but that also, our mind can like turn around and impact our body. There's a causal relationship between our mind and our body. That's what Descartes thought. This view says no. The causal relationship only goes one way. Our body, our brain, impacts our mind, but our mind doesn't go the other way. Our mind doesn't impact anything, any physical stuff. Does that make sense? So let me draw a picture. Descartes' view. We got this is the mind. Okay, take that as the mind. And take this as the body. Okay. Descartes thought that these things impact one another. This view says it only goes this way. Physical stuff has an impact on mental stuff, but mental stuff doesn't have impact on physical stuff. Does that make sense? Okay, so what do you think of this view? Our emotions, our experiences, our perceptions, it's just kind of like a movie playing in our head. It's real, but it has no impact on physical things.
I don't think I feel like whenever I'm anxious, I feel it in my body. Like you think something's stressful and then like your stomach will hurt.
Right.
Or like you break out or something. So I think they go both ways.
Okay, so you like Descartes' view more.
Yeah.
You're like, this doesn't seem right to me. Right? Like when I'm having a certain day, when my mood is a certain way, that does affect my body. Like, when I learn a distressing piece of news, I do have a stomach ache. Right? When I learned that my boyfriend cheated on me, I felt ill. Right? Okay, yeah, so that's a good objection. Right? Yeah, does it really seem that physical stuff is not impacted by mental stuff? Yeah.
You could just watching like a movie, then once making the decision.
Well, that's another question, yeah. Is there any I there? Is there any self there? Yeah, that's a completely other issue. Pretty fucked up movie, right? But yeah, it's a good question, right? Is it true that mental stuff has no impact on physical stuff? But there's another problem here as well. Does anybody see what the other problem is with the story that I've provided here? This is a common problem or issue in the philosophy of mind. Has to do with this word right here. It's called the problem of emergence. These thinkers, and for example, the scientists, the contemporary scientists, will say things like, once you have a complex enough state of matter, the thing acquires a mind. How the fuck does that work? Seriously, like, why does just arranging the atoms in a thing all of a sudden produce consciousness? How could that be? What is the explanation for that? That's the problem of emergence. How can we explain the mind emerging from physical stuff? What's the explanation for that? So any philosophy of mind that talks about the mind emerging has to deal with this problem. How does the mind emerge from a non-mental stage of development? Physically, what's going on there? Why does that happen? What's the explanation? So far, we don't have a good explanation for that. We just assert it as a brute fact that, yeah, once you got a complex enough arrangement of matter, it becomes conscious somehow. But we don't know how that works. So that's another problem with this view. Okay? Oh, luckily there are a bunch of other views, though, to choose from. Okay? How about the one that Descartes liked? I called it interactionism during that lecture. Can somebody summarize what they think this view is? It's basically the one Descartes has. Think about the picture I drew.
The brain interacts with your mind, and the mind interacts.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Now, a lot of interactionists are going to agree with this first part. Mental phenomena somehow emerge from physical phenomena. but that they both have a causal impact on each other. Now, I don't think Descartes himself thought that our minds emerged from states of matter. I think he thought that we were given like a mind by God at the point of our birth or conception or something like that, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to have to look into that. So yeah, it's basically the view that, look, our mind can affect physical things can affect our mind. For example, like when I punch you in the face, you're going to feel pain, right? You're going to suffer, right? Physically and mentally, right? Or like when you receive bad news, your body feels a bad way. Or when I cut off your arm, you're mentally traumatized. Right? So it goes both ways. Well, of course, this view also suffers from the problem of emergence. Right? How is it the case that, our minds, we have spontaneously or somehow acquired consciousness when at one point in our evolutionary history we didn't have it? How did that happen? But then there's another problem too. And this is the problem that Elizabeth of Bohemia discussed with Descartes in one of their correspondences, which we've already talked about, which is this. We understand what it's like for physical stuff to impact other physical stuff, right? Check this out. This is a physical thing. That wall is a physical thing. Look at that. There was a collision, right? It stopped. Something happened. But if the mind is not a physical thing, how can the mind impact something that's physical? How can a non-physical thing impact something that's non-physical or that's physical? How does that work?
Because it manifests itself in physical ways, like the synapses and stuff like that.
I think that pushes the problem just back another step. Because let's say you're like, okay, yeah, it can have an impact on the body because you said manifests in physical ways, right? How does a non-physical thing manifest in a physical way? Right? It's like, how do we get to wrap our minds around that, right? Unless, our mind and our body are connected through some sort of intermediary medium that is like, I don't know. I don't know, and Descartes didn't have a good response to this either, for how a non-physical thing can have a causal relationship with a physical thing. It seems mysterious, right? It would be like a ghost touching you. How does a ghost touch you if it doesn't have a body? Right? It's weird. So, how do the mental and physical interact? It's a weird problem. This is what Churchland says about it on page 9. Okay? If mind stuff is so utterly different from matter stuff, different to the point that mind stuff has no mass, no shape, no position in space, then how is it possible for my mind to have any causal influence on my body at all? As Descartes himself was aware, he was the first to formulate the law of the conservation of momentum, ordinary matter in space behaves according to rigid laws, and one cannot get bodily movement from nothing. How is this utterly insubstantial thinking substance to have any influence on matter? How can two such different things be in any sort of causal contact? Descartes proposed a very subtle material substance, animal spirits, to convey the mind's influence to the body in general, but this does not provide us with a solution, since it leaves us with the same problem with which we started. How something ponderous and spatial, like animal spirits, can interact with something entirely non-spatial. So, I guess let's call this the problem of interaction. It certainly seems intuitive to us that the mind and the body, that mental stuff and physical stuff interact, but how that is the case is a mystery. We don't have a good description for that. Okay, let's talk about one more view. Maybe y'all will like this one. This gets around some of the problems, but it's pretty weird, okay? It's called elementalism. It's the view that I believe Galen Strawson supports. We've been running up against this problem of emergence, right? How does our mind emerge from a physical state of matter, from a complex arrangement of atoms and molecules? How can something non-spatial, non-extended, it doesn't have volume or mass, our mind, come out of something that has mass, is spatially organized, all this stuff? Well, elementalism says, do you want to know why we have minds? There are little bits of mental stuff in everything. In the table, there are little mentally bits. They're just not arranged properly for that thing to be conscious. In this chalk, there are little mentally bits. But they're not arranged properly. That's why it's not conscious. It doesn't feel, it doesn't have any desires. Our mentally bits just happen to be arranged in the way that we can perceive the world and reflect and all this stuff. So, in everything, in atoms, molecules, table, there's physically bits and there's mentally bits. And they're all kind of mixed and jumbled up maybe. But in a human being, they're organized in a particular way. The physical bits and the mentally bits. So, this view basically says mental phenomena are fundamental properties of reality. They're there. They don't emerge from physical stuff. They're already there. Okay? So, a laptop. Let's see if I can draw a laptop. A laptop it's made up of all these physically bits, and it's made up of all these mentally bits. Same thing with everything that exists in the universe. It's made up of mentally bits and physically bits. But these things aren't conscious. Okay, they don't have a consciousness. They don't have perception, desires. But we do, because our mentally bits are arranged in the proper way. So, really, everything that you see around you has mental and physical components to it. So what do you think of this view? If you take this view far enough, you get the idea everything has a spirit, right? Or everything has a mind. Does anybody know what this view is called? Panpsychism, right? Everything has a mind. Now, Strawson doesn't think everything has a mind, because in order to have a mind, the mentally bits need to be arranged in the proper way. So, we don't have to worry about abusing the table, because the table can't feel anything. Okay? Its mentally bits are not arranged in the proper way. But you can see how this gets around some of the problems we've been looking at, right? At least the problem of emergence. Right? It's not saying, physical stuff, and then all of a sudden, mental stuff comes out of nowhere. It's saying, no, the mental stuff was always there. It was just, not arranged properly. Anybody like this one? Or are you like, I don't fucking know, this is a weird view. I
think it's kind of cool.
You think it's kind of cool, yeah? You like the idea that there are mentally bits in that table?
Like, I've never heard of this, so it's like very new, but I think it's kind of like how all the planets have all these different properties that they share, like water and distance from the sun and this and that, but for some reason Earth had the right amount of everything to sustain life. Like we have the right organization of whatever to sustain
the right elements, the right distance from the sun. Yeah.
I just think it's cool. I don't know if I believe it or not, but I think it's interesting.
I think it's kind of cool. Yeah, I think it would be even cooler if everything did have its own mind. But then, I don't know, maybe that might cause us to freak out, Like this chalk is screaming to itself. It's like, you're holding me, too.
Or maybe it likes to be touched.
Maybe it likes to be touched, maybe.
Crazy sentence.
But here's a weird thing, right? Have we ever seen these mentally bits? What do they look like? One of the problems of this view is, try as we might, it doesn't seem like we can detect these mentally bits. Right? I mean, we look at the laptop. Where's the mentally bits in it? I see metal. I see plastic. Right? Where's the stuff that's supposed to make up a mind? What does that look like? What are its characteristics like? It doesn't seem like we're able to detect them, so if we don't have any evidence for them, right? Why would we believe that mentally bits exist and everything? That would be like thinking, yeah, tiny little goblins exist within the quantum foam. They're there. We've never seen them, right?
Aren't there like some things inside that we haven't actually seen, but just like some experiences see what like they affect other things to know they exist?
Yeah. But do we have any evidence that there's something like that for mentally bits? Like when we look at, let's say we do a double slit experiment, or we do some sort of physics experiment, we don't get any indication that that thing has mentalness, right? It just seems to be behaving according to physical laws and processes. Whereas when we interact with humans, the idea that another human has a mind, it seems like we have good evidence for that because they display all this behavior. That causes us to think there's something going on in there, right? But as far as when we look at atoms, when we look at computers, when we look at tables and chairs, we don't really seem to see these things. Or at least we don't have good evidence that they exist. So, how can we measure them? Doesn't seem like we have. Doesn't seem like we can. So, I don't know. For that reason, this view is sometimes seen as like wooey and like mystical and weird. Okay? But it does get around the problem of emergence, Strawson thinks. On account of all of these views, like not being super duper awesome and all having issues, there has been a turn in the philosophy of mind towards defining the mind in a different way. Instead of defining the mind in terms of what it is made of, there's been a turn towards identifying what is a physical thing and what is a mental thing based on what it does. This is known as mental functionalism. This is where a lot of philosophers of mind are working now, and cognitive scientists. Instead of having endless debates about, well, what exactly is the mind? Where does it come from? There's been a shift towards, what does the mind do? Because looking at things through this lens allows us to solve other problems and further our research better than endlessly questioning, what is this thing called the mind, man? So mental functionalism is the view that minds and mental states are identified by what they do rather than trying to explain what they are. It kind of sidesteps a lot of these problems by saying, it's not really important, we don't need to really know that stuff, let's just talk about what minds do. And that will allow us to solve problems in psychology, all this stuff. Trauma therapy, whatever. It's not so important to know what they are. So we might say that the previous views and the thinkers that we've been looking at up until this point have been concerned with ontology. Ontology is a jargony philosophy word that means the study of what is, the study of existence. These thinkers are interested in figuring out what is. The mental functionalists are working less in ontology. They're not trying to explain what the mind is. They're just trying to uncover its capacities, its tendencies, relying on empirical data. So these are some of the views that have emerged recently in philosophy of mind. Unfortunately for us, these views still leave us with a variety of questions. A variety of issues that seem to have gone unanswered and provide us with questions that may be unsolvable or unanswerable. For example, you've probably heard this before. You've probably talked about this before with your friends or your family members. What color is this chalk?
White.
Is the white I see the same white you see? When we're talking about shapes, colors, other sensible properties of a thing, how do we know that our mental states are like everybody else's? For example, if I were to punch you in the face, you would say, that's painful. Is your feeling of pain the same as mine? How could we know that? How could we know any of our internal experiences are like anybody else's internal experiences? In some weird way, with regards to the way that we experience life, we are all on our own. I can't see inside your mind. You can't see inside my mind. Somehow we're able to communicate with each other about what's going on and what we're feeling and what's happening. But how can we know that our experiences of life are like similar enough at all so that we can communicate? I guess the world hasn't blown up, so I guess our experiences are enough alike, right? When I say, hey Bob, bring that crane down, it's too high up, he doesn't like whip it and throw it, 12 feet to the left. But this is a hard question, right? Like when you look at the table in front of you, you see, creamy, white, beige, speckled thing. Are our colors the same when we use beige and creamy and white? Like maybe your perception of green is actually blue, but you've just been taught to say, yeah, that's green. That's what we call green, right? So how can we know that our minds are like anybody else's? Our experiences and sensations are like anybody else's? What do you think? Is this a weird question? Does it kind of freak you out a little bit? Well, maybe you're not super worried about it. I don't know. It's a fun thing to think about, right? Next time you go camping or hang out with your friends, you can fuck with them, by asking weird questions like this. Here's another interesting question. You know that you have experiences, right? Like you know that you have a mind. You have perceptions, you have feelings, you have emotions. How do you know anybody else has a mind? Can you prove that I have a mind from where you're sitting? Maybe I'm just a complex robot that is just designed to give philosophy lectures. How could you know I have any internal experience? There are some people who are not able to picture things in their own minds. There are some people who don't have an internal dialogue, who don't hear any voices when they think things. I don't really. I can make myself hear a voice if I want to, but it's not like I have something narrating my day. This is known as the problem of philosophical zombie. The philosophical zombie is somebody who, they look and they act like a human, but what if there's nothing going on in there? What if they don't actually have emotions or experiences? They just behave as if they do. Based on how people act, you might think, yeah, nobody fucking has a mind at this school, right? But this is a real problem in the philosophy of mind. We talk and we act like, yeah, people have experiences, they're thinking things, but we can't prove it, right? Doesn't seem like you could prove to yourself or anybody that I have a mind. I know that I have a mind. I think. What do you think of this issue? Yeah.
I just think it's sort of scary because, I was just drawing comparisons. Like, my mind first, immediately when you were talking about certain things, my mind immediately went to serial killers. Where they put up a front, oh, they're, so empathetic, so relatable, such a good person. No, they're not. No, they are not.
And, yeah, I think the thing that distinguishes serial killers from what we would call, normal people, right, is that they don't have the same emotional reactions that we do, or...
Yeah, some of them can fake it, some of them don't really care.
Right. This problem asks us to imagine that to, the most intense degree possible. what if you are the only conscious being on Earth and everybody else has nothing going on in here?
Is it sociopaths that don't feel anything? Isn't there something where like there's people that don't have emotional responses?
I bet there's somebody out there.
I honestly, someone pops
I don't
up on
know.
TikTok all the time, and they say that like, I forget what they said they have, but they don't have any emotional response because of what they like have going on with themselves.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think it's.
I don't know. I don't know what the name of that would be. But this view that you are the only conscious thing is known as solipsism. Right? Have you all heard of this before? Solipsism. And it's kind of attractive once you realize we can't prove anybody really has a mind, can we? Because the knowledge that we would need is accessible only to that person, right? I can't feel your pain. I can't feel what it's like to be you. I can't know what it's like to be you from the inside. And so you might wonder, yeah, how could we ever know if this was true? Doesn't seem like we can. And that's kind of scary, right? Finally, we could ask, what does all this say about AI? Let's get a little bit science fiction-y here. What do y'all think? Do you think an artificial intelligence algorithm could become conscious? Yeah? That means that you don't think consciousness needs to be organic, right? We can build it out of inorganic components like silicon and metal, right? Or maybe you think like in order to be conscious, there needs to be some living element there. I don't know.
Levels of it, right?
Okay, talk about that. There's levels of what?
Consciousness.
Levels of consciousness. Okay.
You know how like certain people are, you know, have a little bit more awareness than others. So maybe AI, in a sense, is just like a lower level of consciousness where the mind can't perform or function. But who's to say that, you know, can't eventually get to that point? So maybe that's where that pair comes in.
Yeah, and we like to, we think that animals are like conscious somewhat, right? They react to stimuli, right? They are directed towards certain goals. They feel. Maybe the better word for them would be, we know that animals are sentient. Sentience is often defined as having feeling. Like if you're sentient, you feel things. Like a dog will feel it when you smack it, right? A bug will feel it less, right? It won't have the same sophisticated pain experience, right? What is consciousness? That's a hard question. For some philosophers, they think in order for something to be conscious, it needs to have the capacity for self-reflection. So they would say, like, look, animals have sentience, but they don't have consciousness because they can't think about their own existence. They can't reflect. And we can distinguish both of these from what we might call intelligence, right? Just because something feels doesn't mean it's intelligent. Just because something can reflect doesn't mean it's intelligent. How do we define intelligence? I don't know, maybe like the capacity to win games or something? Or to solve problems? We have a lot of artificial intelligence algorithms that are extremely intelligent. They can solve problems, they can do calculations way faster than we can, right? But are they sentient? So far, we don't have a lot of evidence that the things in computers have developed feeling. We don't have much evidence that they've developed reflection. But there was a scare about this not too long ago. Does anybody remember the Google engineer who was worried that this artificial intelligence algorithm they were working with had woken up? And he was freaking out about it. And people just kind of shat on him online and stuff. But he was legitimately worried about it.
For a while, there was this one where two AIs were speaking. I forget the exact
right, yeah.
It was, but the two AIs were speaking, and they started creating their own language within, or just their form of communicating really fast. And I think that rather than, I don't know what to say, so I think it's sentience with intelligence rather than reflection, but I, at a certain aspect, don't know how we would measure consciousness, but I also think that animals, could you, rather than sentience, you could judge off of like an octopus or any eight-legged creature, for example, how they have like a shit ton of brains.
Yeah.
So they can format patterns like cuttlefish have recreated checkerboards, and it's like something animals cannot do at all.
Yeah.
Can also not do. So would that be then a measured bit of consciousness because they're able to then look, feel, see, do?
I don't know. It depends on how we define it, right? I guess.
Yeah.
That's weird, right? And then we have these birds that engage in these crazy mating rituals, right? Just like watch Planet Earth and stuff. You know, you have species of birds that will like go out and find things and like set up a display for this female they're trying to woo, right? And make it all pretty, and even maybe do a little dance for them or something. Like, is that a conscious thing? Is that an intelligent thing? See, it's cool. I don't know what it is, but it's cool.
Just reminds me of what you were saying before about like the AI sort of like gaining like sentience or whatever. It sort of reminded me of a movie I saw, War Games.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen War Games, I highly recommend you watch it. It's very interesting. But I remember post-war games, President Reagan saw it, and he actually spoke to, I think, his Secretary of Defense. He was like, hey, could something like this actually happen? Like, concerned about hacking and, like, AI systems in charge of, like, weapons, defenses, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So they went and they did their own sort of, like, investigation, came back and told him, yes, it can happen, and it's much worse of a problem than what we thought. And because of that movie, there were so many new laws or stuff passed to develop in terms of regulating technology and safety and stuff like that.
Yeah. There's two general views about AI. Two really general views. One is that AI is going to be the saviors of mankind. They're going to solve all of our problems because they'll be able to analyze everything and look at it all from a more intelligent, objective view than we are. The other view is that they're going to bring the apocalypse. And so there are a lot of philosophers and scientists right now that are concerned, positively and negatively, with AI development. There was a letter that just came out a few months ago that a bunch of people signed that said, we need to halt AI development because we don't know what's going to happen. And we're playing with something we don't understand. So, I don't know. There's cause for worry. I think there's also cause for a lot of enchantment. So I don't know. Go home later, watch some AI videos. Learn more about philosophy of mind. It'll be fun. Or scary. Maybe both. Okay. That's all I got for you. If you are interested in reading any thought experiments, I'm going to post my teaching notes. If you're somebody who gets scared easily and does not want to implicate themselves, do not read the last thing on my teaching notes. Okay? I put a warning before it. You'll see it. That's all I'll say.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you on Wednesday.